Fog crawls between the balsam firs on a Blue Ridge morning. A two-lane road curves down through the pines and delivers you to 18 motel doors painted the color of pond water. Above the office window, a red neon sign flickers with one letter missing. What lights up now reads "Akansi." A girl stands beneath it, 20 years old. Funeral coat still buttoned to her throat. Boots wet at the toe from a walk she made in the dark. In one hand, $11. In the other, an apartment key that no longer opens the apartment. Behind her, a wooden footbridge crosses a dry creek. A single plank in the middle of that bridge has been worn smooth by 55 years of hands. Someone has been keeping this place. Someone has been keeping something else too. Something sealed. Something dated 2013. Something a man in a dark suit would burn this building down to keep her from opening. She reaches for the door. The ridge above Ashe County held its breath that October morning. Mist crawled between the balsam firs like something trying to remember where it lived. Blue Ridge sky thin as watered milk. A two-lane road curved down through the trees and stopped in front of 18 doors painted a green so old it had gone the color of pond water. Two rows of rooms, the upper row flat, the lower row tilting 4 degrees down the slope. The tin roof bowed at one corner like a wave that had frozen halfway through breaking. A wooden footbridge ran across a dry creek called Ledger Creek and delivered anyone crossing it to a small apartment attached to the lobby. The bridge was 22 feet long, no railings. A single plank near the middle was worn smooth as a knife handle by 55 years of hands that had touched it out of habit on the way past. Above the office window, the vacancy sign glowed weakly in the daylight, except the V had been out since the winter of 2023. What lit up now read "Akansi" in tired red neon. A girl stood beneath it, 20 years old, black wool coat borrowed from a funeral home, a backpack that had gone gray at the seams from too many washings in too many strangers' washing machines. Her hair pulled back with an elastic that had lost its stretch. Boots wet at the toe from where the frost had caught her on the walk up from the county road. In her right hand, $11. 7 of it in ones, the rest in quarters and dimes, and a lone nickel that Hester had given her once for luck when she was 6, and she had kept in the same coat pocket ever since. In her left hand, an apartment key that no longer opened the apartment. She didn't have a home. She didn't have a car. She didn't have anyone waiting in a truck at the end of the funeral to drive her back to a place with her name on the mailbox. Because there was no truck, and there was no mailbox. And the only person who had ever put her name on anything was in the ground now, under 6 inches of red mountain dirt at Pilgrim Rest Cemetery. And the family who had shown up to bury her had already decided what would happen next without asking. The girl's name was Meridian Blackthorn. Everyone who had ever loved her called her Mary. Everyone who had ever loved her fit into a room the size of a broom closet. She looked up at the sign, "Akansi." She spoke the word out loud, rough, just to hear whether her mouth still worked. Then she walked toward the lobby door. 3 hours earlier, they had buried Hester. The service had been at the little clapboard church on Old Homestead Road, the one with the split rail fence and the graveyard behind it, where the stones leaned like tired shoulders. The pastor said the correct things. Hester was 78 years old. She ran the Juniper Wayside Motel from 1970 until the week she died. She was survived by her son Broderick and her daughter Ophelia and her granddaughter Meridian. He pronounced Meridian's name like he was not sure he had it right. Broderick sat in the front row in a dark suit that pulled tight across his shoulders. 58 years old, beard trimmed square, hands folded like a man practicing patience for a photograph. Beside him, Ophelia in a black dress and a string of pearls that looked exactly 1 shade whiter than her teeth. 54, estate coordinator part-time out of a small office in West Jefferson. Notary bond on the wall behind her desk. 2 children of her own, neither of them there. Mary sat in the second row, alone. She had not seen either of them in 12 years, not since the summer her parents had died and the family had gathered in a days-in conference room outside Boone to decide what to do with the 8-year-old girl who now belonged nowhere in particular. Hester had wanted to take her. Mary remembered that part. The rest was fog and county paperwork and a long series of houses where she had never been allowed to unpack all the way. After the burial, everyone drove back to the motel, because that was where Hester had lived, and because there was casserole waiting. The lobby smelled like coffee and lily-scented candles, and the sweet, dry hay smell of the wildflower arrangement Winifred Pettigrew had brought over from her yard down by the creek. Aunt Bev from Sparta was setting out paper plates. Cousins Mary had never met were shaking her hand and squinting at her like she was a photograph they were trying to place. A concrete rabbit held the lobby door open. Hester had bought it at a flea market in 1998 and never got around to moving it inside for winter. Broderick stood by the counter with his back to the window and watched the room fill up. He watched Mary stand near the coffee urn without drinking any of it. He watched her the way a man watches a fence line he intends to move. Then he came across the room and held out his hand and asked for the keys, sweetheart. Ophelia was beside him almost before the word left his mouth. She had a way of arriving without having appeared to walk anywhere. Her fingers touched Mary's forearm. Her nails were painted the color of old blood. "Just for tonight," she murmured. "Just for tonight, honey." Mary looked down at the ring in her own palm. The apartment key, the office key, the laundry room key, the soda machine cabinet. Hester's Ford key, with the black plastic cover cracked all the way through. The brass master that opened every guest room in the place. She unhooked the truck key from the ring, just the truck key, held it out to Broderick. His hand closed around the whole ring. She told him evenly he would only need the truck one. He smiled without showing teeth. Put the ring in his pocket. Not the truck key, all of it. Told her she was exhausted, kiddo. He would handle the property tonight. They would talk in the morning, because that was how it began. Not with shouting, not with locks changed and lawyers called. With a man in a dark suit putting a set of keys into his own pocket, while a girl who had just buried her grandmother stood in a room full of people eating potato salad on paper plates. Ophelia leaned in, perfume like a magazine sample. There was a guest room made up at their place, she offered. A bag already packed. She had taken the liberty. Mary had looked so tired at the church. Mary turned her head, asked which room. The blue one, Ophelia answered. Off the kitchen. Which house, Mary asked. There's West Jefferson, only 40 minutes away. And the bag, Mary asked. Whose bag? Ophelia's smile flickered just barely like a bulb about to go out. She said it was Mary's bag, honey, from the apartment. Just a few things, nightgown, toothbrush. Her grandmother's pill organizer in case she wanted to keep it as a keepsake, though. Of course, the compartments were empty now, the poor dear. The pill organizer. Mary had never taken a pill from Hester's organizer in her life. She was not Hester's dependent. She was not on Hester's medication. She was 20 years old and healthy, and she had aged out of the North Carolina foster care system 4 months ago with a duffel bag and a debit card that had $92 on it. What she needed a pill organizer for, she could not have said, which meant Ophelia had packed it for some other reason, which meant Ophelia had gone into the apartment, which meant Ophelia already had a key. Mary did not say any of that. She thanked her aunt for the kindness. She said it the way Hester had taught her to say things when the person across the counter had already decided what they wanted the truth to be. Steady, low, not agreeing to anything the words themselves didn't contain. She followed Ophelia to the car. Behind her, Broderick was already speaking to Aunt Bev about vacuuming. The upstairs guest room in Ophelia's house was blue in a way that felt medicated. Blue walls, blue quilt, blue lampshade with a fringe of little glass beads. On the dresser sat a porcelain angel with hands folded and its head tilted to one side watching. Mary turned it toward the wall. The duffel bag was on the floor by the bed. She opened it. A nightgown she did not recognize. Toothbrush still in its plastic sleeve. 2 shirts from her own closet folded wrong. Underwear she was fairly certain had been in the laundry hamper at the apartment. And on top, sitting like a small plastic verdict, Hester's pill organizer. Sunday through Saturday. Each compartment full, someone had refilled it. Mary stood a long time looking at that. She could not decide if it was worse that Ophelia had gone into her clothes or that someone had gone into Hester's medications. Medications that no longer had a person to belong to, and refilled the compartments as though a woman who had been dead 6 days might still need her Wednesday morning tablets. Downstairs, the vent above the baseboard began to move air, and with it voices. Broderick's voice, Ophelia's. A third voice she could not identify at first until she realized it was the voice of a phone on speaker. A man's voice. Low, confident. The kind of voice that talked about property lines the way most people talked about the weather. The buyer would not wait forever, the phone said. He had been held off 2 weeks already. Broderick's answer came muffled, but Mary caught the shape of it. Give her one night. She would be reasonable by morning. She had nowhere else. Ophelia's laugh through the vent, small and dry. The girl had $11 in her coat, she reminded them. Where was she going to run to? Mary sat down on the edge of the blue bed with the plastic pill organizer in her hand. Because the girl had $11 in her coat. $11 in her coat, and a grandmother in the ground, and an aunt who counted other people's money out loud through the vent. And a bag she hadn't packed, and a house key she hadn't been given the choice about. She waited until the voices went quiet, until the downstairs lamp clicked off, until the ice maker in Ophelia's refrigerator dropped a fresh load of cubes with a sound like small stones falling into a well. Then she picked up her phone and looked up the number for Ashe County Cab. The dispatcher answered on the fourth ring, sounding like a woman who had been half asleep with a magazine on her lap. How far, honey, the dispatcher wanted to know. Juniper Wayside Motel, Mary told her. Off County Road 194. The dispatcher paused, then noted it was an hour-round trip at 4 in the morning. Mary asked what it would cost. The dispatcher paused again. She heard something in Mary's voice maybe, or heard the funeral in it, or just heard the flatness that comes over a person who has already done the arithmetic in her own head and knows the number will be more than she has. 26, the dispatcher answered. Cash. Mary told her she had 11. Another pause. The dispatcher exhaled through her nose. The exhale of a woman who had heard this exact story before from other girls, from other Octobers. Where had they taken her, she wanted to know, and Mary told her. West Jefferson, and the dispatcher promised to send Denver. He owed her a favor. Mary was to give him what she had and not argue when he said it was fine. 10 minutes. Mary put the pill organizer back into the bag. She left the nightgown. She left the toothbrush. She took her own coat, her own boots, her own $11, and she went down the carpeted stairs so quietly that the porcelain angel behind her would not have known she had ever been there. The front door of Ophelia's house closed behind her with the smallest possible click. Denver's cab was an old Crown Victoria that smelled like pine air freshener and burnt coffee. He asked no questions. He drove her the 40 minutes back up into the mountains with the radio turned low on a country station that was playing songs about women who had left in the middle of the night with less than they came with. When they pulled into the motel lot, the Akansi sign was still glowing. It looked in the dark like a small red word trying to remember its own beginning. Mary handed Denver her $11. He looked at it. He handed her back a 5. For coffee later was all he said. Then he pulled out of the lot without turning around, and the taillights went down the hollow road and around the bend and out of sight. And she was alone in the parking lot of the motel. Her grandmother had run for 55 years, and the apartment door had a padlock on it that had not been there yesterday morning. She walked around back. The maintenance shed sat behind the second row of rooms, tucked against the slope, where the ground rose sharp toward a stand of poplars. The door was old wood. The latch was a rusted hasp with a piece of baling wire twisted through it in place of a lock. Hester had never bothered. There was nothing in the shed anyone with sense would want to steal. Mary unwound the wire and pushed the door open. The smell inside was oil and sawdust and mouse. A workbench along one wall, pegboard above it, black marker outlines where tools used to hang. Most of the outlines were empty. She noted that. She stored it. She did not think about it yet. In the corner was an army cot with a wool blanket folded on top. Hester had used it during the ice storm of 2019 when the power was out for 3 days and the guests in room 8 had needed the apartment. Mary unfolded the blanket. It smelled like her grandmother. It smelled like the inside of Hester's coat when Hester had picked her up at that Days Inn 12 years ago and hugged her before the papers had been signed, before the family had decided what would happen next. Mary sat down on the cot. She did not cry. That is worth saying. She did not cry. She sat there with her funeral shoes still on her feet and the $11 coat still buttoned and the borrowed nightgown still folded in a bag in West Jefferson, and she listened to the shed breathe around her. Something scratched at the door, softly, twice, then a nose pushed the door open. The dog was old, black in most places with white on 3 of her 4 paws, and black on the 4th so that from a distance it looked like she had walked through a puddle of ink. Her left ear was notched at the tip where something had taken a piece of it a long time ago. Her left eye was gray with cataract, the color of frost on a window pane. She stood in the doorway of the shed and looked at Mary, and Mary looked back and neither of them moved for the length of a slow breath. Mary spoke her name. Bramble. The dog's tail moved once. Just once. Enough. Bramble came into the shed. She sat on the concrete floor about 3 feet from the cot and lowered her chin onto her white front paw and waited. Mary unwrapped the granola bar in her pocket. She broke it in half. She held out the larger half. Bramble took it as gently as a woman accepting a dance card and chewed it slow and swallowed, and then rested her head on top of Mary's left boot. She stayed there for the rest of the night. Now let me stop here for a minute, because most people who talk about being cast out, the movies, the books, the church sermons, they make it sound like a scene. They make it sound like a moment, a door slamming, a raised voice, somebody's coat being thrown into the snow. That is not what it looks like. It looks like a girl in funeral shoes sharing crackers with a dog in a maintenance shed. It looks like a wool blanket that still smells like a woman who has been dead 6 days. It looks like $11 in one pocket and a $5 bill from a cab driver in the other. It looks like the quietest thing you have ever seen. Which is why the people doing the casting out never think of themselves as villains, because it doesn't look like a scene to them either. It just looks like handling things. Let that sit. Winifred Pettigrew came up the road at 6:30 in the morning. She was 78 years old. She walked with a cane cut from a hickory branch that her late husband had shaped for her the year the arthritis first got into her right knee. She was small, no taller than 5 feet, and her hair was the color of unbleached linen and pinned in a bun so tight it looked like carpentry. She let herself into the lobby with a key from her coat pocket. Because Hester had given her a key in 1975, and Winifred had never once handed it back. Mary had come out of the shed at first light and was standing on the wooden bridge over Ledger Creek, one hand resting on the smooth plank in the middle. She hadn't meant to touch it. Her hand had gone there by itself, the way a hand finds the doorknob of a house you grew up in without your eyes having to look. Winifred came out of the lobby and saw her and did not say anything for a long time. Then she remarked that Mary looked like her mother had at 17 and about to ask her father for something. Mary turned. Winifred crossed the small stretch of gravel between them. Slowly cane first, then boot, in the rhythm of a woman who had learned to travel at exactly the speed her body allowed. She reached into her coat pocket. What she brought out was an ivory comb, yellowed with age, 6 teeth broken off along one end, a tiny carved flower at the base of the spine, a dogwood blossom worn smooth by 30 years of a young woman's thumb. The comb had been Mary's mother's, Winifred explained. Adelie had left it here the summer Mary was 6, on the little table in the apartment. Hester had meant to send it back. She never did. Then Adelie was gone, and Hester couldn't give it back to Adelie, so she gave it to Winifred. Told her to hold it. Said one day the right person would come stand on that bridge again, and Winifred would know what to do with it. Mary took the comb. Her fingers folded around it. She did not speak. Winifred did not require her to speak. That was the thing about Winifred. She was 78 years old, and she had already outlived most of the people she loved, and she had long since stopped needing the world to answer her back before she said what she came to say. Roots grew slower than folks thought, honey, but they grew, even under a floor, even under a whole set of walnut panels. Mary looked up. She wanted to know which panels. Winifred nodded once toward the lobby. Behind the counter, child. Hester had put them in 1971. She was 24 years old, and she was already smarter than any man who ever tried to underestimate her. Broderick had been 3 then. He had been terrified of the sound of a hammer. He wouldn't come near the lobby for a week. Mary looked at the ivory comb in her hand. Then she looked at the lobby door. The padlock on the apartment was still there. But the office window, the one above the outside condenser unit, had never latched properly. Hester had complained about it every spring for as long as Mary could remember. Mary had watched Hester's husband, Odie, dead since 1998, show her mother how to slip a driver's license along the frame and lift the sash from the outside back when Mary's mother was still Adelie Blackthorne and still had a driver's license and still climbed on things. Mary had been 6. She had watched. She had never forgotten. She walked around to the side of the building where the condenser sat on its concrete pad. She stepped up onto the pad. She pulled her old library card out of her wallet, ran it along the seam of the window, felt the resistance, felt it give. The window slid up 2 inches. She wedged her fingers under it and lifted the rest of the way. Behind her on the bridge, Winifred watched with the calm of a woman who had already seen every possible version of this morning and was only interested in which one it turned out to be. Mary went in through the office window. She dropped down onto the desk. She stepped down onto the chair. She stood on the office floor for the first time as its actual owner, though she did not know that yet. The office smelled like old coffee and cedar and Hester's rose hand cream from the tube on the desk that had been half used since March. Mary went to the counter. She ran her hand along the walnut paneling behind it. The seam was almost invisible. If Winifred hadn't named the panels, Mary would never have found it. But Hester had been 24 years old and smarter than any man who ever tried to underestimate her. And young Hester had built a door that only someone who was told about it would ever see. The panel came away in Mary's hand. Behind it, in the narrow space between the studs on a shelf that had been built into the wall specifically to hold them, were 55 ledgers. Olive green cloth, numbered in gold along the spine. 1970, 1971, 1972, all the way down. 2023, 2024, 2025. And on top of the ledgers, tucked between the last book and the wall, was a small tin box the color of a robin's egg. Oval, battered. The lid held closed with a rubber band that had long since dried out and split. Inside the box, 15 sealed envelopes, each labeled in Hester's handwriting. 2010, 2000. One for every year of Mary's life since she was 5. Mary sat down on the floor behind the counter with all of it in her lap. She opened the ledger for 1970 first, the very first one. Hester's handwriting on the inside cover was younger, rounder, less certain than the woman Mary remembered. Juniper Wayside Motel. Opened April 4. Odie built the shelves in room 3. She had painted the doors green because Odie said nobody would come, and she wanted to prove him wrong. A note underneath, "You don't own a place, you keep it." Mary read that line 3 times. Then she set the 1970 ledger aside and pulled out the 2011 book. Because Winifred had said something about her mother, and 2011 was the summer Mary turned 6. In the summer, she had watched Odie show Adelie how to slip a card into a window. She turned to July, then August. Hester's handwriting careful and slanting. The kind of handwriting that had been trained in a country schoolhouse where they still put a red mark on your knuckles if you lean too heavy on the pencil. And then, on the middle of the August 12th entry, in a completely different hand, a hand that was smaller and rounder and used a lighter blue ink, a single line. Right there in the middle of Hester's ledger, written in ink that had faded less than the ink around it, because it was newer, because it had been added later, because someone else had touched Hester's book and been allowed to write in it. Mary asked again about the doors. She's 6. She wants to know how you keep a house closed if the wind wants in. I told her the wind and the house have to make an agreement, initialed at the end. A.B. Adali Blackthorne, Mary's mother. Mary sat on the floor behind the counter of the Juniper Wayside Motel with her mother's handwriting in her lap. Handwriting she did not remember. Handwriting from a summer she had somehow completely forgotten. Her mother had been in this building. Her mother had opened this ledger. Her mother had picked up Hester's pen and added a note that Hester had let stand for 14 years without erasing. Mary touched the letters with the tip of one finger. The paper was slightly rougher there. Where the ink had dried, the fibers had swollen very slightly and never quite gone flat again. She closed the ledger. She was still sitting on the floor behind the counter when the lobby door opened and Broderick walked in. I saw the panel first, because it was hard to miss. The wall had a rectangular hole in it the size of a suitcase. Then he saw Mary. For one full second, his face did something that had nothing to do with his mouth. His eyes moved from the panel to the girl on the floor and back to the panel, and something behind his forehead calculated a number and did not like the number. Then the lawyer's face came back on. Meridian, he said quietly, and let the name hang. She did not look up. She had broken into this property, he informed her. She answered from the floor that she owned this property, because the words came out of her before she thought about them, because she did not know yet whether they were true. She only knew what her hand had found behind the wall and what her mother's handwriting had said in the middle of a summer she had lost. Broderick came further into the lobby. He stopped on the other side of the counter and looked down at her. Sweetheart, he began, softening the word carefully. She did not understand what she had just done. While he had been working with the estate to sort out the timeline of her grandmother's affairs, and while he had been trying to protect her from decisions she was not equipped to make at her age, she had committed criminal trespass. This building was under probate review. She could not be here. She could not break windows. She could not break paneling. And she certainly could not. Whose signature was on the deed, Mary asked. Broderick stopped talking. Mary lifted her head. The 1970 ledger closed on her lap. 54 more ledgers stacked beside her right hip. The blue tin box balanced on her left knee. 15 unopened envelopes waiting inside. Whose signature, she asked, again softer. Because a man who has really inherited a building does not flinch when you ask him who signed the deed. Broderick flinched. It was a small thing, a tightening at the corner of his mouth, a shift of weight from his right foot to his left. If she had not been watching him with the specific attention of a girl who had been given 15 sealed envelopes, in the last 4 minutes she might have missed it. She did not miss it. Broderick recovered. He was good at recovering. 58 years of being the loudest man in every room had taught him how to keep a face steady while his hands did math underneath it. He informed her that he would be back that afternoon with a locksmith and a sheriff's deputy. She would not be here when he arrived. Did she understand him, young lady? She said she understood him, uncle. He told her to get out of his building. She only looked at him, steady, not asking, not conceding, waiting. He didn't answer the look. He turned, walked out. The lobby door swung shut behind him and made the small brass bell overhead ring once thin and slightly out of tune. Mary sat on the floor with 55 years of her grandmother's handwriting in her arms and waited until Broderick's truck engine had faded down the hollow road before she moved. Then she stood up. She carried the ledgers into the apartment one armload at a time through the door behind the counter that had never been padlocked because Broderick had not thought to look. She stacked them on the kitchen table. She set the tin box in the center. She put her mother's ivory comb next to it. Then she went out to the payphone at the corner of the lot and called a locksmith. His name was Delmar Yancey. He came from Jefferson in a white van with peel and stick lettering that said Yancey Lock. He was 54 and heavy and moved like a man who had spent his life bending over other people's doorknobs. He took one look at the 18 doors of the Juniper Wayside and gave Mary a price that made her sit down on the concrete rabbit. $180 for all of it. lobby, apartment, and every exterior door on the property, and the shed if she wanted it. She told him she had 180 on a foster stipend debit card. He nodded once. Then that was what it cost. He didn't say a word about her age. He didn't ask where her family was. He didn't ask why a 20-year-old girl was standing in the parking lot of a motel with a cataract-eyed dog by her feet, hiring a locksmith on the morning after her grandmother's funeral with the last of her state money. He just started with the lobby. By 10:30, he had rekeyed 6 of the 18 guest room doors. By 11, he had done the lobby and the apartment. He handed her a new master key on a small brass ring. Old brass. The kind of brass that was harder to duplicate. It was hers now, ma'am. Ma'am. She almost handed it back to him and asked him to keep saying it so she could get used to the sound. Instead, she pocketed it. She thanked him. She signed the receipt with her real name, which she had not signed on anything important in a long time. Meridian Blackthorn. At noon, a truck pulled into the lot. It was old, rust along the wheel wells, the kind of truck that got started by a specific combination of pumping and cursing that only its owner understood. The man who got out of it was in his mid-40s, dark hair going salt at the temples, a canvas work jacket that had been laundered too many times to still have any water resistance left in it. He wore a tool belt as loosely as most men wore a tie. He did not wave. He did not call out. He did not walk directly toward the lobby. He walked to the wooden bridge over Ledger Creek. He stopped in the middle of it. He stood there for 2 full seconds, just breathing the way a man breathes when he has crossed the same 22 feet of planking so many times that the crossing itself has become a small private prayer. Then he reached down and touched 2 fingers briefly to the smooth, worn plank in the middle, the way a Catholic touches holy water. Then he came the rest of the way across. Mary was standing in the lobby doorway watching him. Bramble was sitting on the concrete rabbit. The dog's tail lifted once, then settled. The man stopped in front of Mary. He looked her up and down. Not the way a man looks at a young woman, the way a man looks at a set of blueprints. He wanted to know where the leak was. Mary blinked. She could only manage the word "excuse me." He clarified. The leak. That row. He pointed at the tilted second row of guest rooms, 14 through 18. Been leaking since spring. Hester was going to call him in September. She didn't. Mary admitted she did not know. That was fine, he would find it. His name was Ephraim Sawyer. He extended his hand. She took it, calloused across the base of every finger, cool from the outside air. She gave him her name back. He said he knew who she was and that he was sorry about her grandmother. He said it flat. No lift on the sorry, no performance. Just a fact laid down between them like a plank across a creek. Shingles don't grieve, he added. She stared at him. I explained. That was what her grandmother used to say. When something broke on the property, shingles don't grieve, meaning the work doesn't wait for you to be ready, meaning you fix what needs fixing. That was his rate, incidentally. His rate was his rate. He didn't do grief discounts. Hester tried to give him one after Odie died. He wouldn't take it. Wouldn't be right. She asked what it would cost. Depends on how bad, he told her. He would walk it. He walked past her into the lobby. He did not ask permission. He did not comment on the panel. He did not comment on the ledgers, though he glanced at the counter and saw the empty rectangle in the wall, and did not by the smallest flicker look surprised. He went out through the back and started up the tilted row. Mary stood in the lobby doorway. The wooden bridge stretched out behind her. The smooth plank in the middle still held the ghost of his 2 fingers on it. Bramble lay across her feet. The Akansi sign hummed in the noon sun. She reached into her coat pocket and took out the $11. Then she added the 5 from the cab driver. $16. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she put it back into her pocket. Because $16 was not a lot of money. But it was more than 11. And 11 had been enough to buy her a ride home in the middle of the night. And 11 had bought her a granola bar and a dog and a wool blanket that still smelled like her grandmother, and 11 apparently had been enough to get her as far as the panel in the wall. She turned back to the ledgers stacked on the kitchen table through the doorway behind the counter. She had 15 envelopes to open. She had 55 years of her grandmother's handwriting to read. She had a contractor on the roof of the tilted row who did not do grief discounts and did not ask permission to walk through her building. She had a locksmith's receipt in her pocket signed with her real name. And somewhere between the apartment door and the office window and the wooden bridge over the creek, she had stopped being the girl who slept in the parking lot of a place she legally owned. She had become the girl who owned a place. She did not know it yet. Not fully. That reveal was still weeks away, buried in a manila envelope in Winifred Pettigrew's kitchen drawer, sealed since 2013, waiting for the right pair of hands to open it. But the shape of it had already begun to move under her feet, the way a root moves under a floorboard, slow and stubborn, and impossible to stop once it has decided to grow. She picked up the 2010 envelope first, because that was the oldest, because she wanted to start at the beginning. She slid it open with her thumbnail. Inside was a single sheet of pale yellow paper folded in thirds with Hester's handwriting on it. It was dated May 3rd, 2010. Mary would have been 5 years old. The letter began, "My darling, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and Broderick has already tried to take the motel, and Winifred has already given you the comb. Good. That means you are exactly where I hoped you would be. So let me tell you the only rule that has ever mattered in this hollow. You don't own a place. You keep it. Everything else I have to say to you comes after that sentence. Read on when you are ready." Mary lowered the letter to her lap. Outside on the tilted row, Ephraim Sawyer's boots moved across the tin roof with the steady rhythm of a man who had walked that roof more times than the woman who owned it had and did not need to be told where to step. Bramble breathed slow at her feet. The Akansi sign flickered once held and burned steady in the October light. Ephraim walked the tilted row for 2 hours. He did not talk while he walked. Mary followed at a distance of about 6 feet the way you follow a large animal you have not yet decided is safe. Bramble came behind her, 3 white paws and 1 black, taking the incline, the slow way her old back legs stepping wide to keep the 4 degrees of slope from tipping her over. Ephraim had a small spiral notebook in his back pocket. He wrote things in it without breaking stride. He did not show her what he wrote. He climbed a metal ladder to the tin roof of the tilted row and stayed up there long enough that Mary began to worry, and then he came back down without seeming to have hurried at all. He stopped in front of room 16. The door of room 16 had a piece of green painter's tape on it, in Hester's handwriting. Read inside, "Do not rent." Ephraim tapped the tape once with the pad of his finger. Sealing was all he offered. Mary waited for him to continue. "That was where it came down first," he explained. "The flashing above 16 went last April. Her grandmother put a trash can under the drip. She meant to call him. She didn't get to." Mary looked at the tape and turned the question over in her mouth before she asked how bad. 800 to patch, he told her, if the decking under it was sound. If it wasn't more. He wouldn't lie to her about that. He didn't guess when it was her money. I walked to the end of the tilted row and stood at the point where the walkway ran out into empty air, where the last 4 rooms, 15, 16, 17, 18, hung on steel columns above the dry creek bed. Mary had always been afraid of that walkway when she was 6. She was still a little afraid of it at 20. Ephraim stood at the edge of it with his hands in his pockets like a man on the porch of his own house. The other row was fine, he mentioned over his shoulder. 6 rooms usable today, 2 more with cleaning. The tilted row was the problem. 14 through 18, that whole run needed a new roof before the first hard freeze, or the water would get into the wall cavities, and then he wouldn't be fixing shingles. He'd be rebuilding walls. Mary came up beside him. What figure was he working with, she wanted to know. 20, he answered. She repeated the word 1,000 back to him as a question. 18, he corrected. If the framing under it held. 22 if it didn't. 6 weeks of work. Mary did not answer. Because what could she say? She had $164 in a foster stipend debit card and $16 in her coat pocket. She had a locksmith's receipt for $180. She had a stack of ledgers on a kitchen table and 14 unopened envelopes, and an uncle who was coming back that afternoon with a sheriff's deputy who had not yet been informed that the locks on the property had already been changed. She had in fact exactly zero of the $20,000. Ephraim seemed to hear the sentence she had not said out loud. He didn't need the 20 today, he told her. He didn't need it that week. He needed it in pieces when they got to each piece. Materials plus 20% on delivery. Labor after each phase. If she told him stop, they stopped. If she told him go, they went. That was how he had worked for her grandmother for 12 years. That was how he would work for her. He turned and looked at her. If she told him stop right now, he'd go home, no hard feelings. His rate was his rate. Mary looked past him at room 16, the green tape, the word red in Hester's careful handwriting. She thought of Hester standing on the same walkway last April, with a bucket looking up at a ceiling, and knowing exactly what it needed, and knowing exactly what it cost, and putting off the call because the money was not there, and because she had not yet told anyone in her family that she was already dying. Mary put her hand on the walkway railing. Go, she told him. Ephraim nodded once. Materials tomorrow. He'd bring Waylon. Get started on the emergency patches that week. New roof over the tilted row after. He was down the walkway and back at his truck before she thought to ask him what emergency patches meant. He drove out of the lot with the same rusted rhythm of pumping and cursing that had brought him in. Bramble sat down heavily on Mary's left foot. The dog was warm, old. She smelled like a dog that had been sleeping on wool blankets and eating dry kibble and drinking rainwater out of a plastic bowl for the better part of 13 years. Mary crouched down beside her. She scratched the notched ear. She murmured the dog's name. The dog's tail moved once against the walkway. They were going to lose this place, Mary told her quietly. The dog did not disagree, but she did not agree either. She just leaned her graying muzzle against Mary's knee and breathed out through her nose in the long, steady rhythm of an animal who had lived through worse Octobers than this one. The first paying guest arrived at 3 that afternoon. He came in a semi-truck, a big one, dark blue Peterbilt with mud along the running boards and a chrome smokestack that had been polished so many times it had gone soft at the edges. He parked in the far corner of the lot and swung down out of the cab with the slow, careful heaviness of a man in his mid-60s who had spent 45 years climbing in and out of trucks and knew exactly which knee to put down first. He was tall, broad through the shoulders. His hair was almost entirely white and worn short under a mesh cap that said Kenworth on the front. He had a face like a river stone. He walked straight to the lobby and opened the door. Mary was behind the counter. The panel was back in place. The ledgers were locked in the apartment. Bramble was asleep under the counter. The man took his cap off. Ma'am, he offered. She returned the greeting. Sir. He remembered when this counter had a candy jar on the left side, he told her. Buttermints. Her grandmother used to give him one every time he came through here, from about 1978 forward. She always said 1 mint wouldn't rot his teeth, but 2 would. Mary looked at him. He had known her, she said. He knew her husband first, Odie Blackthorne. Worked with him at Whitaker's garage in Sparta the summer of '78. He had been 18. Odie had already been 30 and married to her grandmother. Ran the garage during the day, ran this motel at night. He didn't know when the man slept. He put his cap back on. Thurman Osterhout, he offered. He drove route now, 99 to 201 through the Panhandle, then back east. He'd been sleeping in room 11 of this motel 8 nights a month since 1991. Her grandmother had charged him $42 a night. Never raised the rate, not once, which was foolish of her. But that was her business, not his. Mary wrote his name in the reservation book. She asked how long. A week. Same room, she assumed. Same room, if it still had the heater that whistled. She confirmed that it did. He nodded. That was his heater. He counted out $325 in 20s and put it on the counter. He took the receipt she wrote him. He looked at it. He looked at her signature. Meridian Blackthorne. He tapped the paper twice. That was Odie's granddaughter. Yes, sir, she managed. He remembered Odie talking about a little girl with red boots. That was her, he wanted to know. Mary's throat closed. Yes, sir. Thurman Osterhout looked at her for a long moment. Then he put the receipt in his shirt pocket and turned toward the door. He remembered when her grandfather put in that heater, ma'am. It was 1982. It whistled the day he installed it. He said the whistle was the boiler's way of telling you it was still alive. He tipped his cap. He walked out toward his truck. Mary stood behind the counter with $325 in 20s in her right hand. It was the first money the motel had earned under a decision that had belonged only to her. She put it in the little metal cash box under the counter, the one Hester had used since 1974. She closed the lid gently. She did not lock it, because Hester had never locked it, because there had never been a reason to. By 4 o'clock, Broderick still had not come back. She did not know why. She had expected him at 2. She had braced for the sheriff's deputy at 3. By 4, she had begun to hope quietly and without letting herself believe it, that maybe he had gone away and thought about it and decided the fight was not worth the trouble, which was foolish of her. She knew that even as she was hoping it, because a man who had already refilled his mother's pill organizer to trick a 20-year-old girl into a car was not a man who gave up because it was inconvenient. How was a man who was waiting for weather? Winifred came at 4:30. She had a canvas bag over her shoulder. Inside the bag was a foil-wrapped square of cornbread still warm in one of the 15 envelopes. She sat down at the small round table in the apartment kitchen. She did not ask permission. She had been sitting at that table since 1975. She took the cornbread out of the foil. She broke a corner off for Bramble. She unfolded the envelope's letter with hands that had gone slightly translucent at the knuckles. This one was from 2013, she explained. Her grandmother had written it the week after the accident. Mary sat down across from her. She was afraid. She did not remember the week after the accident. She remembered the accident itself in one bright piece. She remembered the police officer's flashlight. She remembered a plastic cup of water in a hospital hallway. Everything else that year had gone into a room in her head that she had never gone back into. Winifred slid the letter across the table. Mary did not have to read it if she couldn't. Winifred added gently, "It would keep. Some birds don't sing till the ice melts." But Winifred had wanted her to have it in her hand when she decided. Mary picked up the letter. The paper was pale yellow. Hester's handwriting was slower on this one, less certain, as if she had been writing it with a lump in her throat. "My darling, today they took you away from me. I want to write it down so someone will know it was not what I chose. The hospital called at 6 in the morning. Your parents were dead by 7. I was there by 8:30. You were sitting in a plastic chair with a coloring book on your lap. You had one red boot on and one red boot off. You looked at me and said, 'Grandma, why does everyone keep whispering?' And I told you because they haven't decided yet what to say out loud." Mary stopped reading. She set the letter down flat on the table. She stared at the wood grain for a long moment. Winifred did not move. Then Mary picked it up again. "By 10 that morning, your Uncle Broderick and your Aunt Ophelia were in the hospital corridor. Broderick had a legal pad. Ophelia had a folder from the Department of Social Services. She said she had picked up on the way, though it had been printed the day before. They said I was 66. They said I was too old. They said the motel was not a proper environment for a child. They said the state would place you in a foster home in Ashe County, close enough that I could visit, but with proper structure." Broderick was smiling the whole time. That was the part I could not forgive. Mary's hand shook once hard, then went still. "I signed, because if I had fought them in that corridor, they would have put you in a home 2 counties away just to prove they could. I signed, and I have hated myself for every single one of the 12 years since. I did not know at the time that I had already done the other thing. The thing that would matter more in the end than the signature. That's in another envelope. Not this one. This one is only for me to tell you I did not choose to lose you. They made me, and I have been building a way back to you ever since." The letter ended there. Mary folded it very slowly. She put it back in its envelope. She set the envelope on the table between her hands and looked at Winifred across the cornbread. They made her sign, Mary repeated softly. They made her sign, honey. They came to the hospital with the paperwork already filled out. They did. Broderick was smiling. Winifred's mouth tightened at one corner. That boy had been smiling in the wrong room since he was 6 years old, she confided. Her grandmother had told her once she watched him smile at a funeral when he was 8. His own grandmother's funeral. He caught her looking and stopped and never did it again in front of her. But she knew. From then on, she knew. Mary set both hands flat on the table. She did not cry. That is worth saying again because it will matter later. She did not cry. There was something else in another envelope, she said quietly. Yes, there was sugar. Mary waited. That was not Winifred's to tell her. Her grandmother had wanted her to find it in the order she wrote it. And Winifred had learned in 78 years of living not to argue with a dead woman about the order of things. Winifred put the last piece of cornbread on the table between them. She looked at Mary the way a woman looks at another woman she has decided to trust. Whatever was in the envelope that came at the end, the one dated 2024, was the one Broderick would burn down this building to keep her from opening. So she was to keep those envelopes somewhere he couldn't get to them. That was the only advice Winifred had for her today. She stood up. She kissed the top of Mary's head very lightly. Her lips smelled like peppermint. She left through the lobby. The doorbell rang once softly and she was gone. Now, if you have stayed with me this far, stay a little longer. Because what happens in the next 10 minutes is the reason her grandmother built the whole thing to hold together for 12 years without telling a soul. Broderick came back at 4:57. He did not come alone. He came in his truck with a passenger, and the passenger was a man Mary had never seen before. And the passenger got out of the truck first and stood in the parking lot looking around with the calm, assessing gaze of a man who was already deciding what he would tear down first. The passenger was tall, silver hair, a tan barn coat over a button-down shirt. He was in his 50s, he carried nothing in his hands, and yet everything about him suggested he was carrying a checkbook. Broderick got out on the driver's side. He walked up to the lobby door. He tried his key. The key did not turn. He tried it again. He jiggled it. He pulled it out and looked at it as though the key had personally betrayed him. Then he saw above the doorknob a small circular scratch of newness on the lock face. The clean, bright metal of a cylinder that had been installed that morning. His whole shoulders went still. Mary opened the door from the inside. She stood in the doorway. She did not step outside. Uncle, she offered without inflection. Broderick looked at her for a long moment. His face did the thing it had done that morning behind the counter. The 2-second recalculation. Then the lawyer's face came back on. Meridian, he began and gestured toward the passenger. This was Preston Halverson. He was a commercial real estate investor from Winston-Salem. He had expressed serious interest in acquiring this property. He was here to see it. Mary told him plainly that Preston Halverson was not seeing it today. The investor produced a smile that had nothing to do with his eyes. Miss Blackthorne, he tried. Might he call her Meridian? He might call her Miss Blackthorne, she informed him. Broderick's jaw moved. He asked Preston to excuse them for one moment. Preston Halverson wandered a diplomatic distance across the lot. Broderick stepped closer to the doorway. His voice dropped. Sweetheart, he began. She was to listen to him, listen carefully. While he had been trying to protect this family's interests, and while he had been trying to give her time to grieve properly, she had hired a locksmith with money she did not have, and she had broken into a property under probate review, and she had refused to receive counsel from the estate attorney of record, which was him. He was the estate attorney of record. He filed the paperwork. He signed as executor. He paused. He softened his voice further, because that was the part he was good at. The pivot. Preston was offering $8,000 for her interest in the property. $8,000. Cash. Today. That was more money than she had ever seen in her life. She could go anywhere. She could go back to school. She could start over. She could have a life that did not smell like a dying motel on a mountain road. Mary looked past him at Preston Halverson, who was standing next to the concrete rabbit examining the vacancy sign, as though he had already decided which piece of the sign he was going to sell for scrap. $8,000. That was the number Broderick had used. 8. And underneath it, buried in the way he had said it, was a second number he had not said out loud. Because a man who is offering you 8,000 for something believes the something is worth at least 12. And a real estate investor from Winston-Salem does not drive an hour and a half up a hollow road on a Tuesday afternoon for a $12,000 parcel. He drives it for a $120,000 parcel, or 200. She did not do the math out loud. She asked instead about the lights. Broderick blinked. What lights? He had said he'd been keeping the lights on, she reminded him. Broderick opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. Meridian, he tried. This was not a helpful. She only looked at him. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. Broderick's face changed a third time. This time it was not the lawyer's face. This time it was the face of a boy who had been caught by his mother stealing a buttermint from the jar on the counter in 1967 and had no defense left except anger. She was going to regret this, he told her. Did she understand him? She had no idea what she was doing. She was 20 years old. She had been in 6 foster homes. She had never held a job for more than 8 months. She was not equipped to run a motel. She was not equipped to make a decision this size. Mary closed the door. She did not slam it. She simply closed it. She turned the deadbolt. She stepped back from the glass. Broderick stood on the other side of the door and stared at her through it for a long, slow second. Then he turned and walked back to the truck. Preston Halverson was already waiting by the passenger door with the polite, embarrassed patience of a man who had seen this exact scene play out in other parking lots in other counties. He got in. Broderick got in. The truck pulled out of the lot. Mary watched them go until the taillights were gone around the bend in the hollow road. Then she went back into the apartment kitchen. She sat down at the round table. She put her palms flat against the wood. Bramble came over and put her chin on Mary's knee. The dog's cataract eye was the color of frost on a window pane. The other eye was bright and dark and watching. He had come with a buyer, Mary murmured to the dog. The dog breathed. He had come with a buyer before 4 in the afternoon on the day after the funeral. The dog breathed. Outside, the sky had begun to darken. Not with evening, with weather. The storm came in at 7:14. Mary had walked through 8 of the 18 rooms with a flashlight before she felt the pressure change. She was standing in room 16 when the first fat drop hit the tin roof directly over her head. A single sound. Cannon shot on a warm morning, then the whole sky opened. The rain came down in sheets. It came down sideways. It came down the way October storms come down in the southern Appalachians when the front has been sitting off the Tennessee line all afternoon, working itself into a temper. It came down hard enough to make the tin of the tilted row hum like a struck bell. Mary was still in room 16. The ceiling was already stained. The trash can Hester had put under the drip in April was still there. Empty. Now with the rain hammering on the failed flashing above the vent, the ceiling began to bleed. First a drop, then 2, then a small brown stream, then a sound. It was not the sound of a leak. It was the sound of a 2x8 coming loose. Mary looked up. Above her in the middle of the ceiling, the oak beam that ran the length of room 16 had shifted. She could see the seam of daylight, or rather stormlight, where it had pulled a full inch away from the joist. She had 2 seconds. She used them. She dove for the doorway. The beam came down. It did not fall clean. It fell at an angle. The far end stayed connected to the header above the bathroom door. The near end swung down like a pendulum and struck the mattress in the frame and the little wooden nightstand with Hester's Gideon Bible on it. And everything went down together in a cloud of plaster dust and old insulation and cold rainwater, and the beam came to rest across the doorway. Mary was already on the walkway. She had made it out by the length of one boot. Her right hand was bleeding. She looked at it. Somewhere in the dive, she had opened up a strip of skin along the base of her thumb on the doorframe. Blood was mixing with rainwater and running down her wrist and into the cuff of her coat. Rain hammered the tin roof. Rain hammered the walkway. Rain hammered her sideways hard enough to make her eyes sting. She stood there. She looked at the beam blocking the doorway of room 16. Alone, she was not going to move it. She knew that immediately. It was oak. It was probably 12 feet long. It probably weighed 200 pounds. There was no lever in the shed that would fit under it at the right angle, and there was no one to help her lever it, and Ephraim Sawyer would not be back until tomorrow morning. Which meant room 16 was now not just red-taped. It was closed, physically closed, blocked. The rain would keep pouring in through the hole in the ceiling for as long as the storm lasted, and the water would come down through the floor, and the floor would probably rot before spring, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about any of it tonight. She sat down on the walkway. She did not bother crawling under the overhang. She sat in the rain. Bramble came up the walkway to find her. The dog moved slow because the wood was wet and her old back legs did not grip well on wet wood. She got to Mary and lay down beside her, pressing her body against Mary's left thigh, using her own back and shoulders as a windbreak against the storm. The dog did not tell her it would be all right. The dog just breathed and breathed and breathed. Damn. Let me tell you something about family that shows up in a parking lot with plastic bins. They are not there to help you pack. They are there to take inventory. They are counting what is in the drawers. They are counting what is in the shed. They are counting what is behind the walls. Every time. Every single time. And they will smile while they do it. And they will call you sweetie. And they will hand you a pill organizer that isn't yours and tell you it's for keepsakes. Let that sit. Because Ophelia arrived at 8:42 that same night. The rain had slackened to a steady soaking cold. Ophelia's SUV pulled into the lot with the wipers on medium and her headlights making two long yellow tunnels in the wet dark. She parked in front of the lobby. She got out with the calm of a woman who had rehearsed her opening line in the car. She was carrying a plastic storage bin. 60 quart, clear plastic, blue lid. Mary watched her from the office window. Bramble stood at Mary's knee. The dog's ruff was up along the shoulders. Ophelia knocked politely on the lobby door. It was Aunt Ophelia, she called through the glass. She had come to help. Mary unlocked the door. Ophelia stepped inside. She looked at Mary's wet hair. She looked at Mary's bleeding thumb now wrapped in a paper towel. She looked at the plaster dust that had settled onto the front of Mary's coat. "Oh, honey," she breathed. "Oh, honey, look at her. Look at the state of her." This was exactly what she had been afraid of. She set the plastic bin down on the counter. She had come to help her pack a few things. Just a few. Some clothes, some personal items. She could not stay here tonight. It wasn't safe. Something had clearly fallen in one of the rooms. She was hurt. She was wet. This place had stopped being a home tonight, sweetie. It had become a hazard. And she hated to say this, but which room fell, Mary asked her. Ophelia paused. What? Which room fell, Mary repeated. Ophelia's smile stayed on her face but did not move upward toward her eyes. She didn't know, honey. One of the ones on the tilted side, she assumed. That whole row had been going for years. Her grandmother had known it. She had just refused to admit it. Mary turned the follow-up over in her mouth. How had Ophelia known a room fell? Because Ophelia had said something clearly fell in one of the rooms. Before Mary had said anything to her about it. Before anyone had said anything to her about it. Which meant Ophelia had been on the property or near the property or on the phone with someone on the property between the moment the oak beam had come down and the moment she had arrived at the lobby door. Which meant one of two things. Either Ophelia had been driving up the hollow road with the plastic bin already in her back seat, in which case the visit had been planned before the storm, before the beam. Or she had been on the phone with Broderick. Mary watched Ophelia's face while Ophelia tried to find a way through the question. She had heard it, Ophelia claimed, as she had pulled up. Mary only looked at her. She had heard something, honey. Don't cross-examine her. She was trying to help. Ophelia moved further into the lobby. She was drifting sideways, slowly. The way a person drifts when she is trying to make her destination look accidental. She was drifting toward the counter, toward the wall behind the counter, toward the panel. Mary stepped in front of her, not aggressively, just enough. She offered to carry the bin back to her aunt's car for her. Ophelia's smile flickered. Mary, sweetheart, listen to her. Ophelia had to say something, and she hated to say this, but Mary had to hear it. Her foster file, sweetie. Her foster file had a medical incident on it from when she was 15. It was in there. It didn't matter what really happened. What mattered was what a judge saw when he opened that file. And Ophelia hated to bring it up. She really did. But Mary was 20 years old, and she was trying to run a commercial property alone. And if this went in front of a judge, which Ophelia truly hoped it did not have to, that file would be the very first thing on his desk. She said all of that in one long breath, the way she had rehearsed it in the car. Mary did not answer immediately, because something had gone very quiet inside her chest. The medical incident from when she was 15 had happened at the fourth foster placement, a house in Sparta, with a woman who liked to lock the pantry at night. Mary had gotten out of the house through a window at 2 in the morning and walked 6 miles down a rural road in January to a gas station where she had called social services from the payphone. She had been treated at the emergency room for mild hypothermia and released the next afternoon to a new placement. The medical incident on her file was called suspected self-harm because the social worker had not believed her about the pantry. The medical incident was a lie. The medical incident had been sitting in her file for 5 years, like a small tick nobody had ever bothered to remove. And Ophelia knew about it, which meant Ophelia had accessed the file, which meant since the file was closed to anyone but the child's own attorney or her legal guardian or a court-appointed investigator, that Ophelia had either committed a crime to see it or she had a friend at the county who had committed a crime to see it for her. Mary did not tell her any of that. Which judge, she asked instead very quietly. Ophelia's face went blank for a full second. What? The judge, Mary clarified. Ophelia had said if this went in front of a judge. Which judge had she meant? That was a hypothetical, sweetie. Ophelia was a notary, Mary reminded her. She had a bond. Notaries who accessed sealed juvenile records without authorization lost their bond. That was not a hypothetical. Ophelia's mouth opened. Mary stepped past her. She walked around the counter. She put her hand flat on the walnut panel, not to open it, not to draw attention to it, just to stand between it and the woman with the plastic bin. Bramble had come around the counter now, too. The dog was standing with her weight forward on her 3 good legs and the ruff along her shoulders raised in a low, continuous line. She had never in her life growled at a woman. She growled now. Low, steady, the way an old dog growls when she has decided. Ophelia looked at the dog. She looked at Mary. She picked up her plastic bin. She smiled the same smile. Sweetie, she had come to help. Mary was turning down help. She should remember that when this was all over. When she had lost this place and she was living in her car and she was thinking back on the choices that got her there. She would remember that Ophelia had come here tonight with a bin and Mary had turned her away. She walked to the door. She turned back one more time. She hated to say this, but her grandmother would be so disappointed. Mary did not answer, because there was nothing to answer. Ophelia walked out. The lobby bell rang once. The SUV started up in the wet lot. The headlights swung across the front of the tilted row, and the taillights went down the hollow road and disappeared around the bend. Mary sat down on the floor behind the counter with her back against the walnut panel. Bramble climbed carefully into her lap. All 3 white paws and 1 black. The dog was not a small dog. She was 38 pounds. She was too big for a lap. She did it anyway. Mary put her arms around the dog and held on. At 9:10, she opened the 2023 ledger. She had already lit the kerosene lamp on the kitchen table because the wind had brought a power flicker earlier, and she didn't want to trust the overheads. The lamplight was yellow and steady. The rain had gentled to a soft, continuous hush against the apartment windows. Bramble was asleep under the table. Mary turned the pages of 2023 slowly. January, February, March. Hester's handwriting steady, unhurried, the same as it had been in 1970 and 1985 and 2001. Room bookings, repairs, the names of guests, the names of vendors, amounts paid in and out. April. Hester's handwriting changed. Not entirely. The letters were still recognizably hers, but they had gone slightly slanted, and the pressure was uneven, and the lines wavered at the end of each stroke. April 2. Fell in the bathroom, right hip. Ambulance to Ash Memorial. Broderick came. Ophelia came. Discharged same day with a walker. April 9. Cannot use my right hand well. Trying to write with left. Doctor says small stroke. April 15. Cannot stand for more than 2 minutes. Alma helping with laundry. Ephraim came without being asked. He said I looked like I'd been hit by a bus. I told him I felt like I had hit the bus back. Mary smiled once small and sad and turned the page. June 12. Broderick came, took the circular saw from the shed, said he needed it for a cabinet job. I told him yes. I did not tell him I noted it. July 3. Broderick took the air compressor. He did not ask this time. He said he was going to bring it back on Saturday. Saturday is a construct. July 19th. Extension ladder. He did not come inside the lobby. I saw him from the apartment window. He loaded it into his van and drove away. August 5. Cordless drill set from the workbench. He came inside this time. He said the drill was Odie's and Odie had promised it to him in 1994. Odie never promised anyone anything he did not put in writing. September 22. Red plumbing case. I is running out of tools to take. This is the last one from the shed that is worth more than $50. I am going to write to Undine on Monday. Mary read the pages 3 times. Then she read them a 4th time, because 180 days of her grandmother's slow, careful notation lay open on the table in front of her. And the notation said very plainly that between April and September of 2023, while Hester Blackthorne was fighting to stay upright on a walker with half of her body no longer answering her, her son, Broderick, had come to the property 5 separate times and had taken away 5 separate pieces of equipment that had belonged to his dead father, and Hester had watched him do it, and Hester had written every single instance down in her ledger with the date and the item and the exact wording of the excuse he had offered. And Hester had not said one word to him about the fact that she was watching. She had just kept the book because she had known apparently that one day the book was going to matter. Mary closed the ledger. She sat very still. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. The kerosene lamp burned steady on the table. Bramble breathed slow underneath it. The apartment smelled like wet dog and old paper and lamp oil, and it was the safest Mary had felt in 12 years. Ephraim came back at 6:30 the next morning. He brought Waylon Prescott with him. Waylon was 52, wide across the shoulders, quiet in the way of men who spend most of their days lying on their backs under sinks. He wore a navy cap that had gone gray at the edges from being sweated through too many summers. He nodded once at Mary and did not offer more. Ephraim carried a green tarp and a coil of nylon rope over one shoulder. "Show him 16, he asked her. Mary walked them down the tilted row. She showed them the door of room 16 with the oak beam across the threshold. Ephraim looked at the beam. Waylon looked at the beam. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Ephraim wanted to know how close she had been. She had been under it, she admitted. His mouth tightened at one corner. That was not the answer he had wanted, ma'am. She had moved, she added. He could see that. He was glad. He did not say any more about it. He did not lecture. He did not tell her she should not have been in there alone. He did not ask why she had been walking through rooms at 7 at night with a flashlight in the middle of a Category 3 adjacent storm. He simply looked at the beam and set his coil of rope down on the walkway and put on his gloves and got to work. The two of them moved the beam in 17 minutes. They did not use a lever. They used 2 ropes and a wooden block and the leverage of the walkway railing, and they did it with the wordless coordination of 2 men who had unstuck each other from tight places on other roofs in other years. When the beam finally slid clear of the doorway and thumped down onto the walkway, Waylon straightened up, wiped his forehead once with the back of his wrist, and looked at Mary. Well was the sum of what he had to offer. Then he went to work on the ceiling. Ephraim climbed up to the tin roof over rooms 14 through 18 with the green tarp and the rope and a pouch of galvanized screws in his coat pocket. He was up there for 2 hours. Mary went down to the office and answered the phone twice. She wrote a room reservation for a fiber optic contractor who wanted a room for 4 nights starting Wednesday. She put the payment in the metal cash box, $320. At 9:30, Ephraim came down. His jeans were wet to the knees. His jacket was wet to the collar. He walked into the office and set his gloves on the counter. It wouldn't stop it altogether, he explained, but it would hold till they got proper shingles on. 4 days at the outside. She thanked him. That patch was 240 in materials, he added. His time was on the house. She stared at him. I explained. He didn't take payment for a patch that was supposed to have been done 6 months ago that he hadn't gotten to. That was on him, not on her. She said his name quiet, unable to work out how to hold the sentence he had just given her. He was already halfway to the door. He stopped. He did not turn around. 12 winters back, she asked him. What did that mean? He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he told her. Winter of 2013. His little boy had been 2. He had gotten sick. Pneumonia. They didn't have insurance. Her grandmother had heard about it from Winifred. She had come to his house on a Sunday afternoon with an envelope. Cash. Enough to cover the hospital. She had said he didn't owe her anything, and she never wanted to speak of it again. He had said the same to her. They didn't speak of it. He had been fixing this motel for 12 years for cost. She always tried to give him full rate. He always brought her back the difference in the form of work. It had evened out. He paused. You don't own a place. You keep it. That was what her grandmother had told him at the door that Sunday. He had thought about that sentence a lot since, especially when his boy had started walking, especially when he had started school, especially when he had graduated 8th grade in June. He put his hand on the door frame. That patch was on the house, Miss Blackthorne. That was how it worked. He walked out. The lobby door swung shut. Mary stood at the counter with her hands flat on the wood. The little brass bell overhead was still ringing faintly from the closing of the door. Somewhere down the tilted row, Waylon Prescott began to whistle a tune Mary did not know as he replaced the seals on the pipes running through the wall of room 16. Bramble was asleep by the coffee maker. The clouds had begun to lift. By 4 that afternoon, Mary had booked one more room. By 6, she had walked the tilted row alone and confirmed with her own eyes that the tarp Ephraim had strapped down was holding. By 8, she had cleaned the office. By 9, she had eaten a can of soup at the kitchen table with the 2023 ledger open beside her plate. At 10:22, she heard footsteps on the wooden bridge. Not Winifred's, not Ephraim's. Softer, careful. The step of a man trying to make no sound. Mary closed the ledger. She closed it slowly. She put her hand flat on the cover. She stood up. She did not turn on the overhead. The apartment was lit only by the kerosene lamp and by the low glow of the Akansi sign filtering in through the office window. She walked barefoot to the door between the apartment and the lobby. She opened it half an inch because the lobby door itself had a new lock, and the apartment door had a new lock, and every guest room had a new lock. But the office window above the outside condenser unit had never latched properly, and Ephraim Sawyer had not fixed it yet, and Broderick had been born in the apartment upstairs of this motel in 1967 and had been climbing in and out of that window since he was 9 years old. I was standing on the desk. His shoes were wet from the walkway. He had come across the wooden bridge because it was the only path from the lot that would let him avoid the front. He had the old brass master in his hand, the one Mary had thought she took off the ring, the one she had thought she took, the one he had apparently palmed and swapped for a copy before handing the ring back that morning at the funeral. He had already opened the panel behind the counter. He had the 2023 ledger in his hands. He was tearing out pages, not many, just four. April, June, July, August, September. He had them folded into his coat pocket and was working on the last one when he heard the apartment door hinge move. He turned. He and Mary stared at each other across the lobby counter in the low red light of the Akansi sign for the length of two full breaths. He did not run. He did not apologize. He straightened. She had no evidence, Meridian, he told her softly. Nothing she could prove. Nothing that would hold up. She was alone here. She would be alone here for a long time. And her grandmother had been a foolish, sentimental woman who never understood what this land was worth. He put the last torn page into his pocket. He walked out through the office window. He was gone before Mary crossed the lobby. She stood behind the counter with the empty 2023 ledger in her hands. Then she picked up the phone. She dialed the number Winifred had written on the back of her cornbread foil in soft pencil the day before. Winifred answered on the second ring. Yes, sugar. He had taken the pages. Winifred knew he had. She had seen his taillights from her porch. She had been hoping she was wrong. He had taken April through September of 2023. She knew. Mary was to listen to her. Her grandmother had thought this might happen. Some birds don't sing till the ice melts. She had made a copy of the whole 2023 book in October of 2023, and she had brought it to Winifred in a paper grocery bag and had asked her to keep it in her kitchen drawer until it was needed. It had been in that drawer for 2 years. It was in that drawer right now. Mary was to come get it in the morning. Winifred paused. 7, she added. She'd have coffee on. She hung up. Mary set the phone in the cradle. She looked down at the empty ledger. She looked out at the I can't see sign burning steady in the black October night. And somewhere in the dark, down the hollow road, Broderick Blackthorne was driving home with 4 folded pages in the pocket of his coat, believing he had just closed a door. He had not. He had opened one. Winifred's kitchen at 7 in the morning smelled like coffee and cornbread and the low, sweet smoke of a wood stove that had been going since 4. Mary sat at the small, round oak table with both hands wrapped around a mug that had been in Winifred's cabinet since her wedding in 1968. The mug had a small chip along the rim. Winifred had turned the chip away from Mary's mouth before she poured. That kind of woman. The paper grocery bag was on the table between them. Winifred did not open the bag. She sat across from her with her own mug and waited. That was Winifred's way. She had brought the bag out of the drawer where it had lived for 2 years and 11 days, and she had set it on the table, and she had let the girl look at it as long as the girl needed to look. Mary put her hand on the bag. The paper crackled softly. She asked how long, her voice low, rough at the edges. October of 2023, Winifred told her. Same week her grandmother had gotten out of Ash Memorial the second time. She had driven herself up here in the afternoon. She hadn't been supposed to drive. But she had driven. She had brought this bag and one other thing. Set them both on this table. Sat where Mary was sitting now. Mary wanted to know what the other thing was. That was for later, sugar. She was to open that bag first. Then they would get to the other thing. Her grandmother had been very particular about the order. Mary broke the masking tape. The bag unfolded. Inside was a second ledger, identical to the ones in the panel. Olive green cloth, numbered in gold along the spine, 2023. She lifted it out and opened to April. Hester's handwriting was there, all of it. The uneven pressure of a stroke-slowed hand, the date of the fall, the ambulance, the doctor, the walker, and then June 12th, and then July 3rd, and then July 19th, and then August 5th, and then September 22nd. Every single line Broderick had torn out of the original book last night, at 10:22 in the office of the Juniper Wayside Motel, was on this page, in this book, in this kitchen, in this drawer of this house, 13 months before he had thought to remove it. Mary put her palm flat on the paper. She did not cry. She stopped for a long moment and let her ribs decide what they wanted to do. Her ribs decided to just breathe. That was fine. That was allowed. He had torn out 5 pages last night, Mary told Winifred quietly. Winifred knew he had. He had said she couldn't prove any of it. He hadn't known about this book. He didn't know. I didn't know. Her grandmother had made this copy in her own hand in one long afternoon at this table in October of 2023. She had said Broderick would eventually get bold enough to do exactly what he had done last night. She had been patient. She had already outweighted him for 12 years by then. 2 more had been nothing to her. Winifred stood up. She crossed the kitchen slowly, cane first, then boot, then boot. She opened the same drawer the bag had come from. She took out a manila envelope, sealed, the kind used by lawyers. Along the front in Hester's handwriting, a single line, "For Mary, only after you have read the 2023 book." Winifred put the envelope on the table. She sat back down. That was the other thing, sugar. Mary looked at the envelope for a long time. She did not open it, not yet. She read her way through the 2023 copy first front to back the way Hester had asked her to. She read the notation of the fall. She read the notation of the small stroke. She read her grandmother's steady left-handed accounting of 5 separate visits by a son who was taking pieces of the shed while his mother could not stand up long enough to stop him. She read the whole book because Winifred had said Hester was particular about the order, and Mary had learned in the last 24 hours that when it came to Hester, the order was the whole point. At the end of the book, on the last page of December 2023, Hester had written one line. If Broderick has come for the pages by the time you read this, then Winifred will give you the next envelope. If he has not, wait. He will. Mary looked up at Winifred. Winifred nodded once. Now the envelope, honey. Mary picked it up. She slid her thumb under the sealed flap. The paper inside was thicker than the letters had been. Legal weight, 2 documents. The first was a photocopy of a deed. Ashe County, North Carolina, Register of Deeds. Recorded July 19, 2013. The property at 2144 County Road, 194 Ashe County. More commonly known as the Juniper Wayside Motel, 16.4 acres, including access easement across Ledger Creek, was hereby transferred from Hester Alowen Blackthorne, widow, to Meridian Adali Blackthorne, minor child with Hester Alowen Blackthorne, named as trustee until said minor's 21st birthday. Mary read that twice, then a third time. Then she looked at the date at the top. July 19, 2013, 2 weeks after the accident. 2 weeks after Hester had signed the foster papers in the corridor of Ashe Memorial with Broderick smiling behind her. 2 weeks after Broderick and Ophelia had walked out of that hospital, believing they had shut the door on any claim Hester could ever make on the girl. Hester had waited 2 weeks, and then she had driven to the courthouse in Jefferson, and she had signed the motel over to the 8-year-old granddaughter she was not allowed to raise. Mary set the photocopy down. The second document was smaller, a single sheet, notarized, dated the same day. Undine Blakely, attorney at law, Raleigh, North Carolina, as counsel of record for Hester Alowen Blackthorne, hereby confirms that grantor is of sound mind, and that this conveyance is executed with knowledge of its irrevocability and with the intent that legal ownership of the described property shall vest in Meridian Adali Blackthorne upon her attainment of majority. At the bottom, Hester's signature still steady in 2013. Then Undine's, then a notary stamp. Mary sat perfectly still because a woman had run a motel for 12 years that she did not legally own anymore. She had run it. She had paid the taxes on it. She had reported the income on it. She had let her son believe he would inherit it. She had let her daughter believe she would help manage the estate. She had let the whole family believe that when the day finally came, the ordinary thing was going to happen, the ordinary boring thing families do, and Broderick would get the biggest piece because Broderick was the oldest and the loudest, and everyone else would get whatever fell off the table. And underneath all of that, quietly, patiently, without saying a single word to anyone in the family for 12 full years, she had already done the other thing. She had put the motel in her granddaughter's name. She had put it in her granddaughter's name on the day the state took her granddaughter away, which meant Broderick had never inherited anything, which meant Ophelia had never had anything to coordinate, which meant the property Mary had slept in the maintenance shed of 2 nights ago had in point of fact legally belonged to Mary since she was 8 years old. At the bottom of the envelope was one more thing. A photograph, 4 by 6, slightly faded. Mary turned it over. It was Hester in the hospital nursery in Boone holding a newborn. The date on the back was April 2nd, 2005. Mary's birthday. Hester was 35 weeks off from turning 59, and she was holding a red-faced baby wrapped in a receiving blanket, and she was looking down at the baby with the concentrated expression of a woman making a promise she was going to keep in silence for the next 20 years. On the back of the photograph in Hester's handwriting, "For the one who stays." Mary put the photograph down on top of the deed. She put both palms flat on the table. She looked at Winifred. Winifred looked back. Neither woman spoke, because there was nothing to say. There was only a long, slow breath in the smell of the wood stove and the coffee going cold in the mug with the chip in the rim. Now here is where I need you to picture this. A woman ran a motel for 12 years that she did not legally own anymore. She just did not tell the people who were trying to take it from her. She let them plan. She let them scheme. She let them come to the hospital corridor with a legal pad and a folder from social services already printed the day before. She signed the papers they wanted her to sign. She said the words they wanted to hear. She let her sons smile in the wrong rooms for 12 years. And underneath all of it, she was already building a way back to the granddaughter they took from her. That is not silence. That is strategy played longer than most marriages last. Let that sit. Mary walked out of Winifred's kitchen at 8:15 with the 2023 copy in one arm and the manila envelope in the other, and the photograph in the front pocket of her coat over her heart, where she could feel the corner of it against her collarbone with every step down the gravel drive. She did not go back to the motel right away. She drove Winifred's old pickup. Winifred had pressed the keys into her hand at the door and told her, "Honey." Her knees didn't like the hollow road anymore. She was to keep it a few days into the town of West Jefferson, and she went straight to the small brick office at the corner of Main and 2nd, where the sign in the window read, "Undine Blakely, Attorney at Law Estates and Trusts by appointment." She did not have an appointment. She rang the bell. The woman who opened the door was 71 years old. Silver hair cut to the jaw, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, a cardigan the color of stone. She looked at Mary once up and down, and her face did something small and precise the way a woman's face does when she has been waiting 3 days for a phone call and it has finally come in person. "Miss Blackthorne, Miss Blakely, come in." She had been expecting her. The inside of Undine Blakely's office smelled like beeswax polish and paper. She sat Mary down in a wooden chair across from her desk, and she poured a small glass of water from a pitcher, and she set it in front of Mary without asking whether Mary wanted it, and Mary drank the whole glass without realizing she was doing it. Undine folded her hands. She wanted to see what Mary had brought. Mary set the manila envelope on the desk. Undine did not open it. She simply looked at the front, saw Hester's handwriting, and nodded. That was her copy and her grandmother's handwriting on that envelope. She knew the shape of every letter. She had been her lawyer for 32 years. She had retained her in 1993 when her grandfather Odie was still alive. Hester had stopped calling her anything but Undine in 1994. Undine had stopped calling her anything but Hester in 1995. That was how they had done it. Her grandmother had never told anyone in the family that Undine was her lawyer, Mary observed. She had not. That was intentional. Her uncle Broderick believed his mother's estate attorney was himself. He had filed papers to that effect the day after her grandmother's funeral. Those papers were void. He was not her attorney of record. He never had been. The instrument executed in 2013 superseded any subsequent claim, and Undine's firm held the original. Undine paused. There was one more thing she should know. Mary waited. Her grandmother's will executed in 2014, and updated 3 times contained no mention of the motel, because the motel had never been hers to leave her. The motel had already been Mary's for a year by the time she wrote that will. What the will did contain was a specific bequest of the remaining personal property of the residence, including all books, ledgers, letters, and personal effects to her. It contained a $5,000 bequest to Winifred Pettigrew. It contained a $5,000 bequest to Ephraim Sawyer. It contained a $1 bequest to Broderick Blackthorne, quote, so he understands the gesture, close quote. And it contained a $1 bequest to Ophelia Blackthorne Osgood, quote, for the same reason, close quote. Mary looked at her. She had left them $1 each. She had. That was not an accident. No, it was not an accident. Her grandmother did not make accidents in her paperwork. When she filed her wills with Undine, she had read every clause aloud twice in this chair. She had done it the way a woman reads a hymn. Undine set her pen down. She looked at Mary over the top of her reading glasses. Her uncle had come to see her last night at 9:45. He had been very upset. He had, Undine gathered, had an unproductive evening. He had informed her that he had discovered irregularities in the property records and intended to file a petition to contest. Undine had informed him that any such petition would be met with a countersuit for probate fraud, and that she would additionally be reporting his sister to the North Carolina Secretary of State for improper access to sealed juvenile records. He had left approximately 18 minutes after arriving. Mary did not smile, but something behind her ribs uncurled very slightly, like a hand that had been in a fist for 2 straight days, beginning at last to open one finger. Undine slid a card across the desk. Here was her number. Mary was to call her before she spoke to anyone in her family again. Before, not after. Were they clear? They were clear. Good. She was to go home. That was her building. She had work to do. She drove back up the hollow road in Winifred's pickup with the deed and the will summary and Undine Blakely's card in her lap. The Akansi sign was burning steady in the noonlight. Ephraim's truck was already in the lot. So was Wayland's. So was a third truck she did not recognize. The third truck belonged to Ophelia's daughter's husband, a middle manager from Winston-Salem who Mary had never met, who Ophelia had apparently called at 7 that morning to come up and reason with the girl. He was standing next to the vacancy sign in a golf shirt, looking uncomfortable and holding a briefcase. Mary parked. She got out of the pickup. She walked past him without breaking stride. He tried to introduce himself. He was here to off the property was all she gave him. He only wanted to off the property. He hesitated. He looked around the empty lot as though someone might come out and support him. No one came out. Ephraim was on the roof of room 15. Wayland was under the sink in room 14. Bramble was watching him from the doorway of the lobby with her cataract eye, and her good eye trained on him like 2 separate levels of judgment. He got in his truck. He backed out of the lot. He did not wave. Mary walked into the lobby. She picked up the phone. She called Broderick. She called Ophelia. She told them in the same sentence that they were to be at the Juniper Wayside Motel at 4 o'clock that afternoon, and that they were not to bring anyone with them. She told them that if they came, she had one thing to say. She told them that if they did not come, Undine Blakely would be calling them by 5. Broderick tried to interrupt. She hung up on him mid-sentence. Ophelia she let get out one full sweetheart before she hung up on her too. Then she sat down behind the counter and she waited. If you have stayed with me this far, stay for 10 more minutes. Because what happens next is the reason I wanted to tell you this story. At 3:55, Broderick's truck pulled into the lot. At 3:56, Ophelia's SUV pulled into the lot. They got out separately. They did not look at each other. They walked to the lobby door, and Broderick opened it and let Ophelia enter first, out of what looked like reflex rather than courtesy, and they came into the lobby and stood in the middle of the floor like 2 people who had shown up to a courtroom without a lawyer. Mary was behind the counter. Bramble was under it. Ephraim was in the far corner of the lobby, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He had come down off the roof 20 minutes earlier without being asked. He had washed his hands in the office sink. He had positioned himself at exactly the distance from the counter that said he was not part of this conversation, but that he was in the room. Waylon was somewhere down the tilted row still whistling. That was intentional. That whistle. That whistle said the property was occupied. That whistle said there were witnesses. The heater in the lobby cycled on, the old oil-fired one from 1972 that Odie had installed himself. Outside, the wind had picked up again, a soft, continuous rustle against the office window. Broderick opened his mouth. Mary lifted her right hand, just lifted it, palm up, open. The universal gesture of a woman asking for one moment of silence. Broderick closed his mouth. Mary set three things on the counter. She did it slowly, deliberately, in a specific order. The first thing was the deed, the photocopy Undine had given her that morning. She placed it in the center of the counter and turned it so the recording date faced her uncle and her aunt. Broderick's eyes went to it. He read the top line. He read the date. He read the transferor and the transferee. His face did not do the recalculation this time. His face did nothing at all, which meant Mary understood that some part of him had already begun to suspect. Perhaps last night in Undine's office. Perhaps in the moments after he had climbed out of the office window with pages in his coat. Perhaps years earlier on some Sunday when Hester had smiled at him the wrong way and he had wondered briefly why. The second thing was the page. The single page of Hester's 2023 ledger, open flat, the copied version from Winifred's kitchen drawer. Mary set it beside the deed. She lined up the edges. Broderick's eyes went to the page. He read June 12, circular saw. He read July 3rd, air compressor. He read July 19, extension ladder. He read August 5, cordless drill. He read September 22, red plumbing case. His right hand, without his permission, went to the pocket of his coat where 4 folded pages were still tucked from the night before. He did not take them out, but the hand went there, and Ophelia saw the hand go there, and she looked at him with a small, quick flick of her eyes that said, "What did you do?" Broderick did not answer her. The third thing was the photograph. Mary set it face down first. She turned it over slowly. Hester in the hospital nursery, the newborn in the receiving blanket. Mary's mother's smile visible in the corner of the frame, because Adelie had been there too, standing just behind Hester's shoulder, 28 years old, and alive and holding a plastic cup of vending machine coffee. Mary turned the photograph over one more time. On the back, Hester's handwriting, "For the one who stays." Ophelia made a small sound, not a word, a sound. It came from somewhere near the base of her throat, and she stopped it almost immediately. Broderick did not make a sound. Mary looked at both of them. She spoke exactly once. "Return the tools by tomorrow noon. Every one of them. Or Undine Blakely files with the state notary board on Ophelia and with the North Carolina State Bar on Broderick." That was all she gave them. She did not raise her voice. She did not move her hands. She let the 3 objects on the counter do the speaking, because the deed was the law, and the ledger page was the pattern, and the photograph was the woman who had waited 12 years to have this exact conversation from beyond the grave, using her granddaughter's mouth to say it, and no one in that lobby doubted for 1 second whose voice was actually in the room. Broderick opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked at Ephraim in the corner. Ephraim did not move. He looked at the doorway behind him toward the parking lot, toward escape. He looked back at his sister. Ophelia's face was the color of buttermilk. Then Broderick tried in a voice that had lost its lecture altogether. "Meridian, listen." Mary lifted her palm again. Just the palm. He stopped. He turned. He walked out. Ophelia stood there another 8 seconds. Her eyes went from the photograph to the deed to the page. Her mouth moved once, as if she were about to try honey or sweetheart, or one of the small sugared words she had used all her life to open doors. Then she saw Bramble under the counter watching. The dog did not growl this time. The dog did not need to. Ophelia turned. She walked out. Bramble came out from under the counter and lay down across Mary's feet. The heater cycled off. The lobby went very quiet. Ephraim uncrossed his arms. That'd hold was all he offered. He walked back out to the tilted row. The tools came back the next morning, all 5 of them. Circular saw, air compressor, extension ladder, cordless drill, red plumbing case. Broderick did not bring them himself. He sent a man who worked for him. The man unloaded them in the maintenance shed without speaking and left an envelope on the workbench. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. Mary unfolded it. It read only as requested. No signature, no apology. That was the last time Broderick Blackthorne ever touched anything on the property. He sold his house in Sparta in 11 days. He accepted $20,000 under asking. He and Ophelia moved to Louisville, Kentucky within the month. Ophelia lost her notary bond for 6 months following an investigation into her access to Mary's juvenile file. She did not appeal. Broderick was not disbarred, but 2 clients dropped him inside of 90 days, and he closed his estate practice by spring and took a paralegal position at a firm off of Bardstown Road. Neither of them ever came back to Ashe County. Neither of them ever wrote. Mary did not hear their voices again. That is not a redemption. That is what a door sounds like when it closes for good. Rowena Fairchild came back to the motel on a Tuesday in November. She had worked housekeeping for Hester for 11 years. Then she had quit in 2022, tired and paid too little, and had gone to work at a laundromat in West Jefferson. She was 45, wide across the shoulders, silver streak on the left side of her hair since her father died in 2019. She walked into the lobby carrying 2 thermoses. "Sit," she instructed Mary. Mary sat. "Eat." Rowena pulled a biscuit wrapped in foil out of her jacket pocket and set it on the counter. Then they would work. Mary ate the biscuit. Rowena unscrewed one of the thermoses and poured herself a cup of coffee that was blacker than the coffee in the motel pot had any right to be. She had heard about the funeral. She had heard about the keys. She had heard about the roof coming down in 16. She had heard about the tools. Word traveled. How Mary wondered. Winifred had called her. Of course she had. Rowena had told her she'd come Monday. Winifred had told her to come Tuesday. She had said give the girl 1 more day to decide who she was. Rowena looked at Mary over her coffee. Had she decided? Working on it. Fair. Her rate was $17.50. She cleaned 6 rooms a day, did the linens, and she did not do windows because she was too old to be on a ladder. She took Sundays. That was not negotiable. Her grandmother had tried to negotiate it. She had never won. Mary repeated the number back. $17.50, $17.50. Mary looked at Bramble. Bramble looked at Rowena. Bramble's tail moved once against the floor. Deal. Mary agreed. Rowena drank her coffee. She looked up at the wall above the counter. She looked at the panel that had been put back in place. She did not ask about it. That was her way. Then she told her, she was going to be all right, honey. Rowena had watched 3 generations of women run this building. Her grandmother. Her mother when she had been here in the summers of the 80s. Her. There was a way each of them looked at the tilted row when they first walked out on the walkway. Like the walkway owed them something. Her mother had had it. Her grandmother had had it. She had it. It was a family look. Rowena had not seen it in 12 years. She was glad to see it again. She picked up her thermos. She went to work. Thurman Osterhout came back 3 days later. He booked room 11 for the entire month of November. He counted out $1,400 in 20s and put it on the counter. He remembered when her grandfather had hung that vacancy sign, ma'am. The V had gone out for the first time in the winter of '81. He had climbed up on a step ladder in a blizzard to change the bulb. Winifred still told that story. Was he all right, Mary wanted to know. I had been cold. He had been foolish. He had been married to a woman who told him he was foolish the whole time he was up there, which was the way they had liked it. Thurman took his key. He tipped his cap. He turned back at the door. Miss Blackthorne, he offered. Sir. Odie would be prouder than he could say. He walked out. She stood there behind the counter with $1,400 in her hand and the Akansi sign burning steady in the noonlight, and Bramble asleep by the coffee maker, and she did not cry then either. But it was a near thing. Rufus Marbury came on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. I was 72 years old. He drove up the hollow road in a Ford Ranger that was almost as old as he was. He parked in the lot and got out slowly and walked to the lobby door with the deliberate steadiness of a man who had been holding on to a small task for 27 years and had at last found a place to put it down. He came into the lobby. He did not speak. He did not remove his cap immediately the way Thurman had. He kept it on for a full 10 seconds while he looked at the room. He looked at the counter. He looked at the walnut paneling. He looked at Mary. Then he took his cap off. His own cap. Gray. Weathered. Cotton canvas with a small brass button at the top of the crown. He set it on the counter. Then he reached into his jacket and brought out a second cap. This one was navy blue, faded almost to gray at the crown. The brim was worn to the color of clay along the front edge. A small oval patch above the visor read, Whitaker Garage, Sparta, NC. The brass button at the top was gone. The band inside the cap was stained with the sweat pattern of a specific human head. Rufus placed that cap on the counter next to his own. He looked at Mary. This was Odie's, he told her. He'd want it kept where he kept it. That was all he said. He nodded once. He put his own cap back on. He turned and walked out of the lobby. Mary stood behind the counter with her grandfather's cap in her hands. The brim was still slightly cool from the outside air. The band inside still held the shape of a man who had been dead for 27 years. She turned the cap over. Inside the crown in tiny letters that had gone brown with age, Odie's initials written in laundry marker. O.B. She lifted the cap to her face very briefly. It smelled faintly of motor oil and cedar and pipe smoke. She hung it on the pegboard hook in the office where Hester had once hung her own coat. Damn, let that sit. Eee. A man drove 2 hours to hand back a hat he had carried for 27 years. That is not sentiment. That is a promise that was waiting for the right door to open. And doors open on their own schedule. But when they do, the people who have been holding things for you come walking through carrying every single thing you didn't know had been kept. By the middle of December, Mary had opened 8 rooms. Ephraim had finished the emergency tarp over the tilted row and had begun tearing the old shingles off in preparation for the new roof. Waylon had rebuilt the plumbing under 3 of the tilted row bathrooms. Rowena had cleaned everything twice. The 2013 deed was in a safety deposit box at the branch of Ashe County Federal on Main Street in Jefferson. The originals of all 55 ledgers were in the walnut panel behind the counter. The 15 letters were in the tin box on the kitchen table in the apartment. Mary had read 11 of them. 4 remained sealed. She was reading them in the order Hester had written them, because Hester had been particular about the order. The reservation book had names in it 3 weeks out. The Akansi sign glowed steady red every night from 4 in the afternoon until 7 the next morning. On a Tuesday in mid-December, Mary sat down at the round table in the apartment and drew up 2 documents in her own handwriting. The first was a bill of sale for 1/6 interest in the Juniper Wayside Motel to Ephraim Sawyer, payable in installments, tied to the motel's monthly revenue at a rate of 18% of net for a period not to exceed 7 years. No interest, no penalty for early payment. If the motel had a bad month, the payment was smaller. If the motel had a good month, the payment was larger. If the motel closed, the installment paused. Ephraim would own the 6th outright when the balance was paid, not before. The second was an identical document for Rowena Fairchild. She brought them both to Undine Blakely on a Wednesday. Undine read them. Undine took off her reading glasses. Undine looked at her for a long moment. She was giving away shares, Undine observed. She was selling shares. She was selling them at a price that would make any conventional lender laugh out of the room. She was not a lender. No, she was not. Miss Blackthorne. Ma'am, She understood that a woman who did this was going to be underestimated by conventional lenders and buyers for the rest of her career. She did understand that. Good. Undine put her glasses back on. She would draw the papers. She was to bring her parties to sign next Tuesday. Ephraim signed his in the lobby on a Tuesday afternoon in December. He read the document twice. He asked one question, which was whether the 18% was net or gross. And when Undine said net, he nodded once and picked up the pen. He signed his full name, Ephraim Robert Sawyer. He set the pen down. He looked at Mary. That'd hold. Rowena signed hers about 20 minutes later. She did not read it twice. She read it once. She snorted at the sentence about the installments pausing if the motel closed. She noted that it was not going to close. She signed her name. She poured herself another cup of the black coffee she had brought in her thermos. She went back to work. That was ownership. Not charity, not gift, not favor. Ownership. At the end of the first week of March, Mary walked out to the vacancy sign at 4 in the afternoon and looked up at it. The V had been replaced 2 days before a new tube shipped from Thurman Osterhout's electrician friend down in Charlotte and installed by a young man named Tucker, who had learned from his father, who had learned from Odie in the 70s. The V burned steady. The sign read vacancy for the first time in 3 years. Mary stood in the parking lot for a long time looking at it. Bramble sat next to her. 3 white paws, 1 black, notched left ear, cataract eye. The dog was 13.5 years old, and she was slowing down noticeably. Mary had begun carrying her up the wooden bridge in the mornings when the frost made the plank slick. The dog leaned against her shin. Mary put her hand on the notched ear, told her low that they had kept it, told her again. The dog did not answer, but something behind her cataract eye moved and she pressed her ribs harder against Mary's leg, and that was enough. The last envelope was dated 2024. Mary saved it for a night in early April when the frost had finally broken and the dogwoods on the ridge had begun to open. She sat at the round table in the apartment with the lamp on, Bramble asleep at her feet. Rowena had gone home for the day. Ephraim was at his own house with his wife and son. The motel had 11 rooms occupied. The wind was soft against the office window. She opened the envelope. Inside was 1 page. Hester's handwriting. From the year before she died. My darling, if you are reading this, then you have opened all the others in the order I set for you, and you have already seen the deed, and you have already faced my son and my daughter across a counter, and you have already begun to keep this place, which means you have already understood what I built. So I want to tell you one more thing. You will get old here, if you want to. That is my hope for you. Not that you keep this motel forever. Not that you become me, but that you get to choose. That is the whole thing I wanted for you and could not give you when they took you out of that hospital corridor. The choice. Now you have it. You have it because I put it in your name in July of 2013, and I never spoke of it aloud, which is not deception, it is patience. And there is a difference between the two. Patience is when you know exactly what you are doing, and you refuse to be hurried by people who cannot see as far as you can. Remember that. One more thing. You will meet a girl someday. She will come up the hollow road with a backpack and no ride and $11 in her coat pocket, and she will stand under the vacancy sign the way you stood there, and she will look at it like it owes her something. When that day comes, you already know what to do, because you know how it felt to be her. And that memory is the only qualification you will ever need. You don't own a place. You keep it. I have loved you for 20 years. I loved you the day I could not take you home. I loved you every day of the 12 years I could not speak to you. And I love you now from wherever I am as you sit at my kitchen table reading this letter with my dog at your feet, which is exactly where I hoped you would be. Grandma. Mary sat very still. She folded the letter. She put it back in the envelope. She set the envelope on top of the 14 others in order, oldest at the bottom, newest at the top, in the tin box that had once been the color of a robin's egg. She closed the lid. Then she cried, not loud, not long, Just once deep, the way a person cries when they finally set down a weight they did not know they had been carrying for 12 years. Bramble woke up. The dog came over and put her chin on Mary's knee. Mary put her hand on Bramble's head. She kept it there for a long time. Outside, the Akansi sign glowed steady. Well, not Akansi anymore. Vacancy. On the 5th of November, exactly 13 months after the funeral, Mary was in the office when she saw a figure at the head of the hollow road. A girl, backpack, the gray at the seams kind, wet boots, no coat heavy enough for November in Ashe County. She was walking up the road toward the motel with the specific tired forward tilt of a person who had walked further than her body wanted to. Mary watched her come. The girl stopped in front of the vacancy sign. She looked up at it. She stood there for a long time. Mary stepped out of the lobby. She walked to the head of the wooden bridge. The girl turned. She was maybe 17, maybe 18. Freckles across the bridge of her nose. Hair pulled back with a rubber band that had lost its stretch. Her lower lip was chapped. She looked at Mary. Was this a motel? She wanted to know, her voice small. It was. Mary confirmed. The girl didn't have much. Mary asked how much. 60. In tens. She had been saving. Mary looked at her for a long moment. Then Mary reached into her back pocket. She pulled out a small brass key on a ring. She held it out. Room 12. She walked closer. She held out the key, and over top of it, 3 folded 20s from the cash box. Refunded was the way she would write it in the ledger later that night in her own hand. Guest paid 60, motel returned 60, net 0. She did not offer charity. She did not offer gift. She did not offer welcome. Because a girl who has walked up a hollow road with $60 in her pocket does not need to be reminded she is being kept. She just needs to be kept. Mary told her the bridge held if she touched the plank on her way over. That was the only rule anybody kept here. The girl looked at the plank in the middle of the bridge. She looked at Mary. She stepped onto the bridge. She touched the smooth, worn plank with 2 fingers. She crossed. Bramble came out from the lobby doorway. Her notched left ear tipped to the right, the way it always tipped to the right, when she was watching a person she had decided to allow into the property. She followed the girl across the bridge at the slow, measured pace of an old dog with 3 good legs, and she disappeared around the corner behind the girl toward room 12. Mary stood at the head of the bridge. She looked down at the plank. She thought briefly of Ephraim on the day he had first come across that bridge and how he had stopped in the middle of it and touched the plank the way a Catholic touches holy water. She thought of Winifred, who had crossed that bridge for 50 years. She thought of Adelie, who had watched Odie show her mother how to open a window in the summer that Mary had been 6. She thought of Hester, who had walked across that bridge every morning of her adult life on the way from the apartment to the office, and who had touched the plank without noticing she was touching it the way you touch the doorknob of a house you grew up in. And she thought of the girl in room 12, who was at that exact moment unlocking a door with a key Mary had just handed her, in a room that had a working heater and clean sheets and a lamp with a charging outlet in the base, and who did not yet know that the plank in the middle of the bridge would still be smooth 30 years from now, because 30 years from now, she would still be touching it. Mary walked back into the lobby. She picked up the 2026 ledger from the shelf under the counter. She opened it to the current page. She uncapped her pen. And in the top margin, in her own handwriting, careful and slightly slanted the way Hester's had been in 1970, she wrote, "You don't own a place. You keep it." Then beneath that, the entry, November 5, new guest room 12, payment refunded, motto passed on. She capped the pen. She closed the ledger. She set it on the shelf. Outside, the vacancy sign burned steady in the November dusk. Every letter lit all the way through from V to Y without a flicker.